Are you someone who struggles with binge eating? You're not restricting your food intake, but everywhere you look, when you're watching or listening to binge eating recovery content, all anyone seems to be talking about is restriction and don't restrict. And so it doesn't feel relevant to you, and that is frustrating. I'm a big believer that restriction plays a large part for most people, and I also believe that for many people it's not the whole picture. So this video is for you if you are not restricting and you truly believe that there is something else beyond restriction that is driving your binge eating. I've got 4 ideas, 4 possibilities, because I don't know you and this is such a complicated problem and it affects everybody differently. But I'm going to pose these as 4 questions and explore them a little bit so that maybe if it applies to you, it might help you to understand yourself and your struggle a little bit better. First question I want you to ask yourself is, does binge eating just feel like who I am? If this is something that has just been a fight and a struggle in your life and you're thinking about it what seems like 24/7, it can feel like it's part of your identity. So maybe you stop restricting, but you're in a situation where you would normally binge and your brain just goes, we're going to binge now because that's just who I am. I'm somebody who binges when they get a Friday night to themselves. If this is you, it's like you can't even imagine what it's like to not binge. You spent so long trying to stop binging, but you don't actually know what it looks like not to binge. You don't have a mental image. It's like your brain can't picture it. And because it can't picture it, in moments when you would normally binge, it's like, aren't we going to binge now? Isn't that what we do? We're going to get a load of food, right? What else are you going to do? Sit here not knowing who you are? Now the trouble is, if you're someone who's been chasing recovery from binge eating, chances are who you thought you might be without binge eating probably looks like a very shiny, better version of yourself. For me, I thought if I was not binge eating, my body would look a certain way. I'd be somebody who was just had self-mastery. I would achieve more, I'd have more confidence, my relationships would look like this, my career would look like this. Gosh, if I had an evening to myself, I'd probably do something really productive. But trying to imagine what that middle ground, yes, it's an evening in, you're on your own, you're kind of bored, you're feeling meh. Trying to imagine what that would look like without filling that feeling with food. And this is going to involve daydreaming. And so the idea is that when you visualize, aka just daydream, just playing out some scenarios in your head about what it might look like. Because when you play it out and you imagine it, your brain has the experience. It starts to build up neural networks of what is possible. The problem is you often tell yourself, well, if I'm not binging, I should be doing this thing over here. I'm talking about getting rid of the shoulds. I'm talking about being able to be unproductive and not always turn to food, to feel that uncomfortable feeling of being unproductive. You don't need to become a better version of yourself to stop binge eating. You just need to allow this version of yourself to contemplate and imagine and visualize and wonder about what it's like. The same situation playing out. You do nothing differently on your evening except you don't binge. And in that visualization, I want you to even imagine that feeling of wanting to binge coming along. What do you do? Because what normally happens, the feeling to binge comes and we either go, oh geez, I guess I'm binging, or we get in a fight with it and we get stressed about it. Quite often this visualization is, what is it like to just let that uncomfortable feeling wash over you? We don't want to be doing this if this is restriction though. That's the problem. This is where people get themselves tied up, is they try to ride out binge urges that are actually coming from restriction. But we're not talking about that in this video. Although neither do I want us to forget that it's often around. Here's the second question I invite you to ask yourself. Is your binge eating actually a solution to a different problem? Like with restriction, binging is the solution to restriction. Restriction's the problem, binging is the solution. So if binge eating is something that you are using to cope, what is it you are trying to cope with? This is the stuff people don't want to hear, because what they want is they want me to tell them, how do I stop this behavior? This behavior is a problem and I want to get rid of this problem in your life. But what if this problem of binge eating is actually helping you with another problem that you don't want to look at? There's an old saying that goes something along the lines of, if a man is hungry, he only has one problem, getting food and eating. But if a man has eaten, now he has 100 problems. And I want to take that and put that onto binge eating. If you're struggling with binge eating, you only have one problem. And whilst that's not technically true, it can feel like it's like, this is the big problem. I don't have to deal with anything else until I've sorted out this binge eating problem. This is my problem in life. And what some people find is they're no longer binge eating, and now they have another 100 problems that are calling for their attention. And it can feel like, oh man, I thought once I got rid of this binge eating, life was going to get easier. And in these situations, it's usually because binge eating was the solution. It wasn't the problem, even though it did become a problem. And the third question I want you to ask yourself is, how much self-judgment do I have about my food choices? What are your levels of guilt like? You might be wondering, well, what has that got to do with binge eating? Of course I don't like how I'm eating. Here's the challenge. Self-judgment puts you in conflict with yourself, because there's a judger in there and there's a part of you being judged. So then everything turns into a battle. This is what the food freedom model tries to offer. It's to try to get you out of conflict with yourself, because when you're not judging and in conflict, it is much easier to hear that inner wisdom. Many people think their self-judgment is wisdom, and it's not. It's pretty unkind. It's a whole load of guilt. And if you've got a lot of guilt around food, it really complicates making food decisions. That is not to say that food regret isn't a very normal part of being a human being on this planet eating food. I will sometimes eat things or eat an amount of things and I feel regret. I don't feel guilt. I don't feel bad about myself, because when you feel bad about yourself for your food choices, now your very sense of self and your good enoughness and how you're doing in life is dependent on what you are or aren't putting in your mouth. It's one of the reasons why mindful eating can feel nearly impossible for someone who struggles with binge eating, because when you are sitting there paying full attention, trying to eat mindfully, your mind has got an idea of what that should look like. And it's usually, if I eat mindfully, I should eat less. And then there's another part, the appetite, that might want to eat more. So now you're in that conflict. You judge your appetite. Now people think, well, if I'm looking at all foods as equal, then I'm just going to eat all these processed foods and all these types of foods, and I'm just going to completely ignore nutrition. And actually there's a research paper that shows, I'll link to it below, that people who score higher on intuitive eating, as in like they are the more intuitive eaters, eat more fruits and vegetables than those that are lower on the intuitive eating spectrum. When we are not at war with ourselves, when we're not judging ourselves, we have a better relationship with ourselves. We naturally want to take care of ourselves rather than shoulding ourselves, having a go at ourselves all the time. Look at me, I'm just destroying my health. And now I feel guilty about not looking after myself, as opposed to, I just want to. I just want to, because I don't think I'm this terrible person just because I struggle with food sometimes. And the last question, I don't talk about this much on my channel because there isn't a huge amount that I can do about it, I guess, or even offer about it. And I don't want to dishearten anybody, but I feel like it's an important question for us all to be asking if we struggle with this, if we struggle with binge eating. And that is, could there be something medically wrong? Our appetite is a cacophony of biological processes and psychological processes and emotional processes, and they all come together into this vortex. I'm not talking about hunger here, I'm talking about appetite, which is the drive to eat. Our appetite can be triggered even though the body doesn't require physical food, and it is just as powerful as hunger. In some ways, it can even feel stronger than hunger. And the reason why I mentioned this one is because I think it was such an important part of my experience. I don't think my binge eating was initially triggered by any kind of significant restriction or emotional. Life was pretty good at that time. I don't think my binge eating was a solution to an emotional problem. From a restriction perspective, full disclosure, before my binge eating started, for the first time in my life, I tried to lose a bit of weight. I did it by just eating more mindfully, and I lost 5 pounds in 3 weeks. Doesn't sound too drastic. But when those 3 weeks were over, I then binged solidly for 9 months. And in those 9 months, I gained 3.5 stone, which is 50 pounds, or about 23 kilos, something like that. Hopefully I've covered all of that. Now, I don't talk about weight a lot because I try like not to focus on weight, but there's something in there like that is quite an extreme response. If that was just restriction, that's extreme. So from when my binge eating started, it was 1.5 years before medical investigation started, by which time I developed bulimia. It was another 10 months of gradually introducing various hormone replacements and some surgery. And I would say that in that time when the hormones replaced, what did change was when my binge eating was really getting going, I was getting up at 2-3 o'clock in the morning to eat, even though I'd gone to bed feeling so full I could hardly sleep. I just wanted to eat all the time. It wasn't like I was able to control myself during the day and then I would just binge in the evening. No, like there was no control. It was so scary. And it was also so visceral. That is not something that I could have managed and when I say managed, I could have fixed from a psychological perspective. There was something very wrong in my body. And so yes, once I got the medical treatment, some of the visceral responses calmed down a bit, but it was another 8 years beyond that of binging and trying to heal my relationship with food because I had lost the capacity to feed myself. I don't make any assumptions about anybody else's experience, was that when it was more physical, it was constant. I didn't get a week or two reprieve as I started to after that. Then it became like more these cycles. I would binge for a bit and then not for a bit and that kind of thing. So that was one of the differences in terms of how it felt for me. I can't say how it would feel for anybody else. But even now, I would say that I am somebody who experiences quite big swings in hormonal hunger. My hormones are all over the place. So there are times when I will eat more food than I really feel quite comfortable eating. But I know how to look after myself. And I know how to bring myself in balance and not judge. So therefore it kind of smooths out. If you're someone who has big swings in your appetite, the more you try to fight the swings, the bigger they'll get. That's something I found out for myself. But it's not always comfortable because I just want to feel like my appetite is like this, just perfectly regulated. Never having the experience of wanting to eat more when I'm full because I'm always managed to be perfectly satisfied. And that wasn't realistic for me. And it may not be realistic for other people, regardless of if your physical health is absolutely fine. I mention this as well because maybe you suspect that there are physical things that impact your appetite. I really want to offer you not to fight with that, to recognize and go like, okay, if I'm going to have these physical swings in my appetite, how do I want to look after myself within that? Working with yourself rather than battling that part of yourself. Because if you battle that part of yourself, I guarantee you'll make the binging worse. I probably shouldn't say guarantee. That was a bit black and white. I can't guarantee anything. I suspect you may make things worse. Anyway, if you recognize yourself in any of these, let me know. If you think that there is something else key here that I have missed off, that's a part of your experience, let me know as well. And I'll leave it there for now. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.